Dr. David Conley is a distinguished professor of educational leadership at the University of Oregon. He is the founder and the director of the Center for Education Policy Research and the Chief Executive Officer of the Education Policy Improvement Center, both at the University of Oregon. Go Ducks. Dr. Conley is well known nationally for his research on issues related to college readiness, college and high school course content analysis, high school college alignment and transition, and large-scale diagnosis and assessment of college readiness. His most recent publication, College and Career Ready, features case profiles of America's most college-ready high schools, helping to inform policymakers, administrators, teachers, parents, and students how they can develop a culture rooted in post-secondary success. His ideas have influenced the work of the OEIB and the statewide 40-40-20 college and career ready goals embedded in the Achievement Compacts. Dr. Conley serves on numerous national technical and advisory panels, including the Common Core State Standards Validation Committee, which he co-chaired. Please join me in welcoming Dr. David Conley.
Well, thank you for that more than gracious introduction. They say an expert is someone who's 100 miles from home, and I figure Wilsonville's 98 miles from Eugene, so we're getting close here. I think I'm here more as a colleague today than anything else. I've been in Oregon for 22 years and have had the opportunity to be involved in a lot of different policy activities. When they asked for the people to stand up, who'd been in a lot of the meetings and situations like this before, I certainly did stand. It's an interesting state, a dynamic state in terms of providing leadership nationally. It's a place where a lot of people actually turn and look for answers. So a lot of what we're doing here is attracting a lot of attention nationally, and I'm really pleased to be a part of it today. I'll go through some of those activities, some of the national work that we're doing, and how some of that relates to what we're doing here, but a larger notion of a conceptual framework in which we can operate. So notice I've been here, as I mentioned, I've been here 22 years. 3 of my daughters have gone through the schools in Oregon, and now I have another reason to be hopeful and about improvement in the Oregon system, that our first grandchild was born 7 weeks ago, so we're pleased to welcome her into the world. My wife Judy's here with me as well today. We also have a group of folks from EPIC, if you'd raise your hands, just to other who are here, and we will be, hopefully you'll have a chance to talk to them as the day goes along. The presentation itself will be available on our website, epiconline.org, so you don't have to wear bingo on this one. If you want to take notes, feel free, but otherwise, if you want to look at the pictures, please do that, and then access the PowerPoint later if you'd like to do that. I'll follow up on Nancy's comments, which I think are really appropriate and really on target, by offering some ideas that I think are very kind of parallel and that extend a lot of what she said. I'm going to talk today about the fact that college and career readiness is really more than a single score on an English and a math test. These are the kind of things that we know intuitively, and yet in the policy arena they kind of get lost. So I want to come back and kind of talk to you about how we think about college and career readiness, how we think about being an educated person for that matter, in broader ways than just a couple of scores. Because we're in an environment now where a tremendous amount of energy is being devoted, particularly at the national level, to Common Core standards, common assessments. These are worthwhile, worthy efforts that will help us achieve the equity goal, help us to move populations forward, but if they become the sole driver of education, we'll be missing the very goals we're trying to achieve, which is getting more students ready to succeed in college and career, not just getting students to achieve a score on a test. Success in post-secondary education settings is a function of readiness across multiple dimensions. Nancy touched on them. I'm going to review them again in a little more depth and detail. I'd ask you to think about readiness then as the alignment among students' skills, interests, and their post-secondary objectives. So this definition adds a little bit more to the notion of readiness than just the score, because it says different students will have different needs based on their different objectives. Now, really important that we not interpret that to mean that we have high expectations for some students and low expectations for another. What it means is, with high expectations for all students, we can still send them the message that they are on the road to success in a given area, even if they have to continue to strive to build skills in other areas. We don't want to send the message that because you're not equally skilled in all areas, you're not prepared to succeed. You may have to work harder, but you have areas of strength that you can build on that are appropriately aligned with your interests. That will be your entryway. That'll be your basis for success in post-secondary education. With that, then, that sets a stage for us to say that the current measures of college and career readiness are insufficient for determining this alignment. The measures we use now, you're familiar with them all. We use grades, we use course titles. Sometimes we'll use a letter of recommendation. But the measures themselves are reaching the limits of their usefulness. Think about grade point average. What we've done in the last 35 years or so is we've gone up about one whole grade point in terms of the average GPA that students have coming out of high school based on analysis of transcripts. And we've gotten ourselves into a position a little bit, as has the world of gymnastics and figure skating and so forth. If you've noticed, they've added another number to the right of the decimal point. Grade point averages now, I hear when people talk about them, they state them as a number out to the hundredths of a point. 3.62, 3.58. How many of you really believe there's a difference between a student whose cumulative grade point average is 3.27 versus 3.41? It may sound better, it may get you a different ranking, but we've instituted a form of false precision. Now, it may be that students are diligently working harder and getting higher grades, but just as likely, we're including more and more elements into a grade, so we have less and less confidence about what it actually represents. We also have pressure, don't we? We have a system that rewards higher grades, not higher achievement, not higher knowledge, not higher skills. And so how many parents come to you and say, would you please lower my child's grade because she really doesn't understand this subject very well? That may never have happened. We've got a system with disincentives in it. It takes the wrong direction, and it takes your integrity as individual educators to hold the line for what constitutes an acceptable grade. Now, that's a lot of burden to put on each and every one of you every day of your lives to say, I'm setting the standard, and I'm going to hold the line. And it might mean that your child is less competitive than the child in the high school next door because I held a higher standard and gave them a more realistic grade that represented their knowledge and skill. So we've got to think about measures that let you have high expectations, hold those high expectations, at the same time that it'll give students clear targets of what they need to do. Because right now, it's not entirely clear what you need to do to achieve a high grade, is it? We've got the Woody Allen rule, which 80% of life is showing up. I mean, we've got to be there, and Nancy talked about the importance of attendance. But we've got to do more than that. We've got to have students engaging in developing a broad set of knowledge and skills, and that's what I'd like to get into, is talking a little bit about some of those kinds of things in just a moment after I go over just a little bit more of the context of this. We're talking about a policy environment in which college and career readiness is the key driving issue now at the federal level. It's probably the most important single organizer for the federal government, at least, thinking about what its policies are going to be around education. Increasingly, we're seeing it at the state level. We're seeing numerous state legislatures kind of waking up to the fact that they have a problem. They have a problem both in attendance in post-secondary education. They have a problem in success in post-secondary education. They have a problem in the alignment between the education of their population and the needs, not only of their workforce, but of their social systems as a whole. To be a functioning member of society, you need a higher level of skill than you did 30, 40 years ago. Has anyone in this room in the last 5 to 10 years tried to deal with a mortgage, applying for a mortgage, making a choice about that? Has anyone here ever looked at your credit cards and tried to decide which credit card was the most advantageous? My youngest daughter called me yesterday and wanted to know what credit card should she get. What skills does it take to make a decision about that, or about whether to refinance a house, or about even which occupations to pursue? We need more knowledge and skill than we did when you could simply show up, get a good grade, get a good job, get a VA mortgage, and not worry about your credit cards. It was a different type of a baseline level of knowledge that we needed. We've created an environment where people are expected to have a higher level of sophistication. Has anyone here ever purchased anything at an IKEA or any place like that? And when you get home, what's the first thing you do? Besides the sort of the buyer's remorse when you realize that you have to put this thing together, right? Think about the strategies you have to use to assemble something that you've purchased like that. I mean, first of all, you need a higher level of reading skill, perhaps. At the very least, you need to be able to decipher visual images, right? Or bad translations from another into English. But more importantly, you need a set of skills and techniques and strategies that go beyond just following directions. How many of you use a skill or a strategy other than following the direction when you're trying to put something together? How many of you use the skill and the strategy of finding someone else to do it for you? I mean, that's a very important skill and strategy to have. Our young people are living in an environment that's simply more complex on all levels. We work around the country in a lot of states. We find in Texas, for example, that they recognize in Texas that their future is completely tied to their ability to educate first-generation college attendees. Regardless of race, ethnicity, income, background, and level, first-generation attendees are going to be critical to their future. And regardless of the political affiliations in that state, there's this realization, even to the point where I think you might recall Governor Perry had a great deal of difficulty trying to articulate that agenda of the DREAM Act and the notion that students who are the children of immigrants should have the right and the ability to go to college. I mean, that's how important and how embedded college and career readiness have gotten into Texas, for example. And we can point around the country to numerous states that have recognized that without the opportunity to access post-secondary education, the state's economies will stall, the state's social systems will be in jeopardy, and they simply will not be able to achieve the tax revenues that they need, and they will not be able to achieve the types of social goals that they have for their states and their students. So this larger agenda, the federal and the state agendas, frame this notion of college and career readiness. It's why it's important. It's why we need to focus on it and we need to think about it. But it's also why how we can use this now as a tool, I think, to achieve broader educational goals that we have in general for students. And that's sort of the content and the focus of my approach to this. With our current model, what we have is a recipe for frustration. What we have is 93% of 8th graders around the country, numerous surveys I've seen have all been in this range, they say they want to go to college. So Nancy's kindergartners there are getting up to 8th grade and they're carrying that message with them. They've heard it on TV, they've heard it from parents and others, and they'll say it. I want to go to college. They have no idea what that means. They have no idea what they should be doing. They have no idea what classes they should be taking. I mean, if you think about I don't know if any of you have high school age students here, or even if you can maybe think back to your own days in high school, but did you pick your classes based upon what was the most challenging, the best course, or did you try to figure out what your friends were doing, or how you could get the best lunch hour, or which teacher was the easiest? We've got a whole system in which the students have a set of incentives for making choices about their classes that don't align with the goal they need to achieve. If researchers have asked students if they know the requirements of state colleges and universities and what it takes to be admitted. In California, for example, when this research was conducted, most students don't know, and as you go down the ladder of income, fewer students know. If you take the first generation college attendees, fewer students yet even know what they need to be doing. So students make poor choices, and they can't recover from those choices as far as the courses they've taken. The net result is they're not well prepared then. They're not as eligible for post-secondary education. And you can see the phenomenon here in the numbers that we have here. By the end of high school, about 70% nationally graduate. I think it's 69 right now, but it's right in that range. Of that, about 4% of that 100 students that we started off in our cohort ended up enrolling in college, and then 26 of our 100 ended up with a college degree. You throw community college in, the number goes up somewhat. But we have that, and Linda will probably talk about this afternoon, Linda Darling-Hammond, that in the US we actually, for the first time, have a population that's less well educated this generation than the previous generation. Almost everywhere else in the world, what you're seeing is tremendous advances in the proportion of the population that is getting a post-secondary education. The US, which was #1 in the world, is now slowly drifting toward the middle of the pack. Not because we're doing worse, we're doing about the same or just slightly worse. Everyone else is catching up and going and exceeding our levels. So the challenge for us is that we've got the right message, we've got the right motivations in place. How do we deliver on this? How do we get students to the point where they are in fact ready to go to succeed in post-secondary education, have the opportunity to do so? Because right now we've got a system where we do have one advantage in that we've got a second chance system, so that even if you don't come out of high school ready to go to college, you still can succeed. But the problem is we've built that in a way that has caused this swirl. And it's become almost a ritual, hasn't it? That almost a part of our culture. I mean, students enroll in, about 1 in 3 students who enroll in either a 4- or 2-year school will transfer at some point. There's reasons for that, for being able to move around and switch. Anywhere from 65 to 85% students will change their majors. Without a raising of hands, think about how many in this room changed your majors at one point or another. Not a bad thing to do, but think about this. Many of us went through college at a time where the financial implications of changing your major was fundamentally different than it is now. I was lucky enough to attend the University of California, Berkeley at a time when the tuition was $0 per year. I paid no tuition to attend college. And I was able to, make some errors and do some exploring, and nevertheless still graduate with a degree in a reasonably timely fashion. 6 years. I guess that's the kind of, there's a long story that I'm going to bore you with. But, well, being at UC Berkeley in the 60s, I mean, that was a problem. It was a whole other problem. My 3 daughters went through college 4 years each, and one of the reasons why is they kind of needed to. That was about how much money they had to get through college. Our students increasingly, they're going to have to make better decisions. They're going to have to be doing things in high school to be ready for college. They're going to have to be anticipating college. They're going to have to be taking college courses while they're in high school. They're going to have to be exploring possibilities more. And in the way that Nancy was talking about the young man who needed to know that if you're allergic to weeds, you probably shouldn't mow lawns. Our students need to be not choosing careers necessarily and doing job training, but they need to be getting a better idea of what it is they want to focus on earlier. So this is a challenge for us. Our young people, particularly those without college degrees, change jobs 7 times in the period of 20 to 29. And that's also become kind of a rite of passage or a ritual too. But it's a bouncing around. It's this failure to launch business, where it's not that they're building a career path, it's that they're doing the experimentation that they should have been doing 10 years earlier. They're finding out about themselves, their interests, and their capabilities. Our schools have to be about more than just a math test or an English test, although those are important things. They have to be about finding out something about who you are. This is a complex society with just infinitely more jobs than we had even 30, 40 years ago, as far as the types of jobs that exist. I mean, I went to a high school where you had a wood shop, auto shop, metal shop. And the idea was you went to one of those 3, and that got you a job. Now, if you think about the types of entry-level positions and how diverse they are, and the industries that come into existence and disappear overnight, whole areas of the economy gone in the last 5 years. Lane County had, we were the number 2 in the country as far as luxury recreational vehicles, the really big, the land yachts, I mean, the really big ones. And what happened to that industry? We lost 5,000 jobs in about 2.5 years. Those were well-paying jobs with benefits that you could get with a high school diploma, and in some cases even without a high school diploma. What happens to those young people? What happens to those adults? We talk about retraining them. What does retraining mean? Well, it means going back to school, doesn't it, in some form or fashion? And what if the new job is call center operator? Maybe not quite as good of a wage, but you still have the benefits and it's good employment. What does it take to go from being a cabinet installer in a luxury RV to a client support center person for Carnival Cruises? At the very least, you need a fundamental set of educational skills, a foundational set that allows you to learn the new trade of the occupation. You also need what? You need a set of people skills, don't you? You need communication skills. You have to be able to talk to others. You need to solve problems. You need to be able to get along with your colleagues, don't you? That's a very different skill set than if all we're doing is focusing on processing students through education, getting them a diploma in their hands, and saying good luck. Getting our young people focused earlier on a career path and pursuing it creates opportunities. And that career path won't be linear. They may get a college degree and then an associate's degree. And then they may work in an area and then get a graduate degree. You just can't plot these careers out in a linear fashion in the way that we've done them before. But we have become a certificate-driven society. To advance in this economy, you have to have some certification of some sort to have access to almost all of the types of positions that are going to be career pathway positions. So thinking about what it means to have our students get certificates, where they're going to have to demonstrate knowledge and skill, to some governmental board or some other entity where they have to pass some test or demonstrate skills. And thinking about what those skill sets are. The foundational skills are important. Going beyond that, absolutely critical. A lot of the points I make are, about college and career readiness are contained in a couple publications that I've put out in the last few years. Please feel free to get a lot more information out of those. I don't get a lot of money off the royalties, so, but please do feel free to take a look at those if you'd like. Noting, just to kind of continue along with these issues of the current model, we're really concerned with eligibility far more than readiness. We're really saying are students eligible for post-secondary education, not are they really ready for it. And I've talked to you about those measures. Students get, when they're admitted to college, get really what we call a hunting license approach, which is, at the University of Oregon, for example, as a faculty member, I can buy a parking permit. With that parking permit, I have the right to drive around the campus and see if there's any parking spaces. I don't have a parking space. I have a hunting license to go hunt for a parking space. And in some senses, when we admit students to college, and this is true for community and four-year, we're not saying you're ready. We're saying you can come here and see if you can find a way to succeed. We are saying we don't know for sure, but we're going to let you come and we're going to see how you do. And we need to move beyond that to a more systematic approach that ensures students are ready, they know what they want to do, and they have a probability of succeeding. Now, recently, you might have seen in the paper, student loan debt has now, in this nation, has now exceeded credit card debt. We have a crisis. It's going to be the next issue around college and career readiness. So I'm trying to link these two for you now instead of 2 or 3 or 5 years from now. If we're getting more and more students ready, they're still going to have to be efficient and effective about the way they move through college. We need to think about these together, particularly for our first-generation students. If we're going to achieve 40-40-20, we're going to have more first-generation students attending. It's the only way to solve and to achieve that goal. And you noted particularly that the space is going to be the greatest at the community college certificate level. A lot of those young people are going to have to be able to go. They won't have tremendous financial support. They're going to have to be efficient and effective to achieve in college. So this will be a hollow dream unless they can get in there and do the work well, be focused, not change majors, get good grades, and move on into their chosen area of endeavor without a tremendous debt load. When we think about readiness, then, we've got to think about these 4 levels. We've got to be thinking about work ready, job ready, career ready, and college ready, and the distinction among them, because I think a lot of times we've kind of blended these together. And we've said if a student's work ready, we've done our job. Well, if we really want to break out what work ready means, we take a look at what employers have said in different surveys in which they define work readiness. And quite frankly, it's kind of a depressingly low level of expectation. Employers say that they would be happy if people could show up for work in the first place. If they could do so and not be on alcohol or drugs when they're there, if they could manage to follow directions, and if they could not get in fights with their coworkers. They'd say, that's it, oh, and not be on drugs. You know, I mean, that's a very acceptable level of entry for employers. And what do they say in most applicant pools for these entry-level jobs that require only a high school diploma? They'll disqualify 40% of the pool right off the bat because they don't meet those criteria. We have an issue. If all we are aiming for is work readiness, we've got an issue. Well, job readiness is that you've got the specific skills to do the job that you've been hired to do. Now, many times your employer will train you to do those skills, to do the specific job. But think about it. What do you need to be able to be trained by that employer? Well, you're certainly going to need some foundational skills, but you're going to need other skills beyond that. You're going to have to know how to learn. Has anyone ever come to you in a job interview, or maybe you've said this to yourself? They didn't have all the skills, but they said, but I'm a quick study, I'm a bright learner, I pick things up. Well, what does that mean? It doesn't mean that they just get a math book or an English book. It means that they understand about the learning process, about how one learns new skills and acquires them. Being job ready, at the very least, means being a learner, knowing how to be a learner and acquire new skills. Career ready, then, is that ability to go into that 2-year program, that certificate program, complete it successfully, and then have the knowledge and skills to continue on along that job pathway to perhaps increasing levels of responsibility or even lateral movements to other areas in that career so that you're adaptable. Career ready is the level we want to get students. And by the way, going to college is a form of career readiness, so let's not, this is not meant to be hierarchical in that sense. But career readiness is when you've got the flexibility to adapt if your situation changes and to take advantage of new opportunities that present themselves. My middle kid is interviewing today for a job with the state of Oregon in public health. She's currently a paramedic, so she's making a career move. Before that, she got a degree from the University of Oregon in human physiology. While she was there, she participated in an EMT program, and then after that, paramedics program. So it's a totally non-linear route, and she's also enrolled in an online nursing program. So it's a non-linear route, but the important thing is you've got the ability to adapt and to change. You're not trapped. Our young people, if they get trapped in jobs, that is not going to be sufficient to be able to make it through the next 30 to 40 years of their working careers. Too much changes too rapidly. Think about our timber workers who were, when I came here in 1989, that was the economy of the state, and how traumatic it's been in those rural communities for our timber workers to make those transitions. And think about the challenges that our first generation college attendees are going to need if we don't think about them being able not just to get a degree, but to be able to continue to adapt and grow and move up the ladder and take on new challenges and responsibilities. And finally, college ready is the ability to succeed in entry-level courses, particularly in general education, which is unique to the US. In many other countries, students, when they go to college, they go into a major, or what we would call a major. Here, you go through general education first. It's one of the reasons why we really need to have students with a solid foundation of knowledge and skills, because they'll be taking a broad range of courses in college. But it also means that when you're developing those skills, you'll be developing a lot more than just the English and the math. You'll be thinking of literacy in a variety of ways beyond what we've considered it currently, and you'll be thinking of mathematics in ways beyond just algebra, geometry, trigonometry, calculus. And I'll come back to that in just a moment. So to summarize that then, if you'll think about college readiness as a continuum rather than a cut score, most students you're going to find are going to be in the middle. They're going to be ready to some degree. That's important to know, because that leads us in the direction not of saying, sorry, you didn't make it, you're remedial. It leads us in the direction of saying, you're strong enough here to succeed in these areas, so please progress in these areas. And you're going to need to develop additional skills while you're proceeding, while you're progressing. We don't want to create a new bar that says everyone who's below that bar does no longer have the opportunity, which everyone has had, to have access to post-secondary education in the US. We've been an open access nation as far as post-secondary education goes, and we don't want to lose that component. But we also don't want to just admit people and then have them proceed at their own peril. We want them to have that probability of succeeding. So what is it going to take to address that middle area, that partially ready area? Well, we've got to understand what it consists of, what it means to be partially ready. So at the heart of our work at EPIC, and as we work around the nation, is a model that has 4 components to it. It says that students need to be able to do these things to be college and career ready. They need to be able to think, they need to know, they need to act, they need to go. If you drop that down to the next level of specificity, under thinking is a series of thinking skills that I'll talk about in a moment. The knowing is a series of key content knowledge that we'll address in a second. The acting then are the key learning skills and techniques, and the going are the key transition knowledge and skills to go from high school to college. So let's move through these just very quickly. If you want to learn more about this, please talk with us. We do have tools and techniques that address these and quite a bit more information about them. We've learned from analyzing entry-level college courses that at 2- and 4-year institutions that students need to be able to formulate problems, not just take a problem that's given to them and complete it. That the biggest difference, particularly between school and the world beyond school, is that problems are fuzzy, they're not clear. Students need to be able to formulate the problem first, not just respond. They need to be able to collect information. Becoming a researcher of various sorts is an incredibly important skill now. And there's a difference between search and research. Our students very often confuse the two. And they think that if you performed a search, you've done research. A lot more to it than that, as you're all aware. When they have the information, our young people very often don't want to take the time to interpret it. They want to just write it up and get the assignment done. We have a very completion-oriented motivation in our schools. We have students who very often are viewing learning as following directions. What are the steps I need to do to complete this task so that I can get on to the next task? Because we have a very rapidly moving train, don't we, in schools? And you don't want to get behind. And very much of the method by which we determine your success is completing the tasks. That's important to do. But being able to interpret the information you have before you start to write up your conclusion or present the results of your problem or your study, that skill is the post-secondary skill. That is the work-based skill that we want to add into the process. The communication piece, then, is the ability to communicate information in an increasingly wide range of modes, of styles. It's not just a paper anymore. It's not just an oral presentation. We can use digital media is becoming incredibly important. Infographics, all sorts of new tools and techniques, social media, other ways that are becoming methods that are used to disseminate information in many different contexts and formats. And then finally, doing all this with precision and accuracy. And I don't think young people are kind of born being precise and accurate. I mean, it's something you have to kind of acquire, I mean, teenagers in particular kind of are, semi-random people in a lot of ways. And getting them to be systematic in their thought and in their attention to detail requires practice. A lot of high achievers, in fact, are fast, but they're sloppy. And they get away with it. And they move out of high school into college. They move into the workplace. That speed is not as valued as being precise and accurate in combination with being fairly quick. It has to be developed. Well, these are some examples of kind of cognitive tasks. We don't really have time to spend on them right now. If you'd like to download the presentation, you can take a look at them. What you see is that, for example, the MAP one is the hardest one to do this cognitive strategies model. But here's an example where students play the role of an actuary, and they have to calculate premiums, but they have to take a series of variables into account. They have to do some research. They have to make some, to interpret. They have to reach some judgments about the trade-offs involved in different types of ways to structure insurance rates. In social sciences, you can see they're conducting research on natural disasters, and they have to outline how to mitigate the impact of different disasters and think about the trade-offs involved with different policy choices. That's different than just describing disasters that have occurred in the world in the last 10 years or something like that. It's a much deeper level of research, interpretation, communication, and also that all-important problem formulation, which is really just figuring out why are disasters a problem? I mean, what is it that causes them to be the problem? Is it nature or is it human behavior? So there's a series of questions that have to be answered at the problem formulation stage that are really critical to the thinking process. The content knowledge that we use, if we use the Common Core standards for English and math, that's great. It helps define. I co-chair the validation committee on the Common Core state standards, so I'm familiar with them. I'm on the technical advisory committee for one of the two consortia assessments. So I've been following it closely. And it's going to be a real challenge, I think, to implement these standards in the way that they're intended to be implemented, which is not just to crosswalk what we're doing from the old to the new and do then a content map to see if we covered them all. The challenge is going to be, can the new standards help us to create learners who have a set of skills that are different than the students we have now? That's the challenge. And so I'll touch on that as we go along. What we know from cognitive and brain sciences is that human beings organize information into structures, into scaffolded models where they fill in the gaps. That we don't learn things sequentially and then store them and order them in our brain sequentially. We get insights and then we kind of have gaps and we go back and fill them in. And that's how we move from being novices to experts. Our learning models are linear models. In schools, our curricular models are linear. Our sort of inherent learning models are more organic, not as linear. We've got to figure out how to get big ideas across, state the big ideas, help the students to understand how the detailed information fits with the bigger ideas. That's how the brain will organize information better. So just to take an example from the Common Core standards, this one, the ELA anchor standard number 1, read closely to determine what the text says explicitly, make logical inferences, cite specific textual evidence. And oh, by the way, see how many of those cognitive strategies show up in that one? So what would competence in this standard look like? How would competence be different with different types of texts? Who's responsible for teaching this? And how is the standard best assessed? if we map this onto our current model, we say, well, the English teacher teaches it and kind of gives a lecture about these things, and then maybe has the students read a couple texts, and then maybe does a paper on it. And yet, the true mastery of this is when you embed this in all of the subject areas. And all of the areas where students are reading and analyzing, they have an opportunity to practice this. It doesn't mean that every teacher has to teach the same thing, but it means that students have to have the opportunity to develop this across a number of areas. And the assessing of it, probably, could we come up with a standardized test where you got a passage and then you had to deconstruct the passage and answer it? Certainly we could. But that's not what we're trying to achieve. What we're trying to achieve is this larger integration, this ability to analyze a much wider range of texts in much greater depth, particularly with an emphasis on informational texts. Much greater need to move out beyond just literature to a wider range of text documents, because students will encounter, particularly in post-secondary education, in community colleges and the workplace, that wider range of texts increasingly will be their basis for what they need to be successful. Well, one really important part that Nancy touched on that I want to come back to real briefly is that students need more than just the content knowledge if they're going to succeed, particularly for the students who are still developing, who are on that pace to develop at a different rate than their fellow students. If we can be developing their learning skills and techniques, then they will possess the capability to truly be lifelong learners. They'll possess the capability to make up skill deficits. And some of us in our own lives, I'm sure, recognize that we've been at different skill levels and have had to come back and pick up and reinforce our skills and add knowledge that where we weren't as strong the first time we learned it. If our young people don't have the skills, if they can't take ownership of learning, if they can't be able to determine how well they're doing objectively, if they can't use help when it's available, they can't keep learning anywhere near as effectively. And what have we found when we look at which students have the least capability in these areas? It's the ones generally who are the lower achievers. The ones who most need to develop these skills have been given the fewest opportunities to do it, because a lot of the learning has been so linear that there's very little opportunity to exercise these types of skills. There's very little opportunity to build them. And which students are least likely to ask for help or take help? Well, in college, it's first-generation college attendees from low-income backgrounds. They're least likely to use the advisors. They're least likely to go to the professors. They believe they have to prove that they can succeed in college. So we've got a perverse model here where the students who need these skills the most are least likely to develop them and least likely to use them. Some of these skills are really pretty straightforward. We can teach time management. We can teach note-taking. We can teach test-taking strategies. These are all important skills to have, and some of them aren't very exciting. But you've got to practice them over time. You can't just be taught them one time. Many of our high achievers have advantages, don't they, where they get this information, they learn how to do these things, they're not taught in school, but they get it. So when we talk about inequality, it creeps into our system in ways that we don't recognize, because we're giving students equal opportunity around access to content knowledge, but we're not giving them equal opportunity about access to learning skills and techniques. So this would be an area that we need to be thinking about systematically to add. So this point really just kind of summarizes the points I was just making to you as well. Those transition skills, if you think about it, we've developed the most complex system in the world for making the transition from high school to college. There's reasons for that. We may not be number one on math and science tests nationally, internationally, but we are number one on the complexity of going to college. Now, the problem of that, no one else that we know of has like a FAFSA. Well, what does the act of having a FAFSA mean? That a lot of people don't complete it. What is the act of having to deal with choosing from 4,200 post-secondary institutions, or at least being overwhelmed by the choice? What about the complexity of the types of tests you have to take to be college eligible, and the transcript information, and so forth? It's very, very complex. Other countries, I've done a lot of work in Australia. When the students get done with high school in Australia, they fill out one form with 3 questions on it, and they're done. The systems have already transmitted all the information. Everything's done. And they just say which majors do they want to be considered for at which institutions. The decisions are made within 6 weeks, they know. When you talk to other countries about what does it mean for students to be college and career ready, I was talking to folks from Ireland about this, and they were like, well, we don't have that term. And I said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, if they go to college, they're ready to go. It's a totally different approach than we have. I mean, they couldn't figure out what it was like one of these language problems. They couldn't figure out what it was. Even though I'm half Irish, so I thought they would have gotten it. But look at the things that are on here. Look at the amount of knowledge and information it's going to take for students to be able to do this successfully. You know, we had, as I mentioned, 3 daughters. The first one, I think we did a good job. She went to the University of Oregon, did great. Second child, also U of O, did quite well. The third one, we took a little more time, and my wife had been working in the Career Center at the high school for a number of years, and we helped her to apply to 9 different institutions around the country, and she got into a number of them. She ended up getting accepted to MIT. We were very proud of her. She's done great. But what's the lesson of that? What's the lesson for college and career readiness? Well, I think at the policy level, the lesson ought to be that we need to make sure that everyone has more children. Because if you have a lot of kids, you mess the first couple up a little bit, and then you get the, anyone here with multiple children, you know what I'm talking about? I didn't really have that figured out so much at the beginning, but by the end I really kind of had it down. So, yeah, I mean, other than that though, I mean, the other alternative would be to start really teaching everyone this information around middle school. And simplifying it as much as we can so that it's not as complex. And then connecting up the high schools and colleges to a much greater degree. Is the same basic point there. We've got to let our students move from being novice to expert learners. We've got to let them move, not just have more and more complex content that they learn as novices, but have them become experts as learners. They become more adept and proficient as learners. And you all know what the difference is between a novice and an expert. You are all experts in something in your lives at this point. And if you look back to when you were a novice, you learned it by a set of rules, and you followed those rules. And now you can skip some of those rules because you know what the intent is. You understand the structure of what it means to be expert in that area. You understand the goals and the purposes. You understand there's workarounds to get around certain problems that if you're a novice, you get stuck and you can't get beyond them. Our learners are not developing beyond novices. Even our highest performing students as 12th graders are novice learners. They may have a wide variety of content knowledge they've been exposed to, but they haven't developed their skills as learners. We want them to make that progression, but we want all students to be on this progression regardless of the content knowledge skill they have. Even if a student is struggling with their content knowledge, we want them to develop as a learner so that if we don't get every bit of knowledge that they need to have, they can still continue throughout their lives to truly be lifelong learners. Without this step, they cannot be lifelong learners. If we leave them at novices, they don't have those learning skills and techniques I was talking about. So just closing now with a few general observations. If college and career readiness are multidimensional, we need multidimensional ways of gauging where students stand along the continuum. Any model that gets us more information should be actionable information. So much of the information we have is what I call rear view mirror information. It's great at telling us where we've been. It tells us very little about where we need to go. Now, it may try to do that, but we really haven't worked those systems out very well that really point you in the direction of saying, this is what we do next. When we talk about reteaching something, that's not what I mean, although reteaching has its role. Reteaching is rear view information. It tells us what we didn't do and we need to fix, but we need information that tells us going forward. We need projective information. We need profiles. We need information that's predicting where we want to go and be. So part of what we need to be thinking about when we're thinking about our career compacts and the like, or our achievement compacts and these issues, is measures that think about profiles of college and career readiness beginning in 8th grade that update regularly so that students are on a guide to a future. That 93% of 8th graders, let's get that to 100%. Let's get them all with profiles. Let's get them focused on a future. Let's get them aspiring to a future and seeing what they need to do to achieve it. So our research on over 30,000 low-income students, including mainly students in inner-city schools in the US, tells us that their aspirations are closely related to their performance level in those 4 keys that I just talked to you about, that aspirations for the least privileged students steadily decrease throughout high school. They start with high aspirations, and they steadily decrease in terms of where they want to go, whether they want to go to college, where they want to go to college, what future they want to pursue. And they're not likely to perform higher than their aspirations require them to do. I mean, how many of us really do better than what we are aspiring for in our lives. I mean, to really, well, I was going to use golf as an example, but that's a terrible one. I mean, no golfer really, I guess all golfers aspire to be great and no one ever gets there, so there's always going to be a gap. But for the rest of our pursuits, it's very rare to achieve at a much higher level than what we aspire to reach. So why should our students be expected to do that? So achieving the goals of 40-40-20 will require us to support or raise the aspirations of all students and then make sure they have the skills to achieve those aspirations. This won't work unless 100% of the students aspire to the goals of 40-40-20. If they don't aspire to it, they will not achieve it. And they will not achieve it if we don't give them the skills to do that. So there's a little circular piece of logic there that goes, without the aspirations, you don't have the performance. Without the performance, you can't achieve the aspirations. We should be cheerleaders for students to ask more of themselves and parents to ask more of their children, all children. We should be supporters of those parents who are doing that. And that's, many of those, by the way, are from our underrepresented communities. We should never assume that a child coming out of a poverty background or from any particular race, ethnic group does not aspire to high achievement because those parents want the same things that other parents want for their children, at least in my experience. We need to support that. We need to reinforce it. We need to build it. That's the model. That's the way that we'll succeed with 40-40-20. The compacts offer the opportunity to define and expand. Oh, I got a typo in there too, so I hope you feel a little bit better. I got a conception spelled wrong there, but so what we want to do is make sure that these achievement compacts have more in them than just a set of math and English scores. There's a lot of ways we can measure these types of things that I've been referring to today. Think about just students' ability to manage their time, how we could simply measure that, how teachers could simply measure students' time management skills with complex assignments that took a while to complete, and did the students complete the parts of it on time? That's a form of time management. And what if you get that measure from 8th grade to 12th grade on how you're doing? You get some feedback. Setting goals, achieving goals. Let's have students set more goals for themselves. That's the aspiration piece. And then see if they're achieving those goals. See if they're on track to achieve those goals. Cognitive strategies. We've got measures that are more complex assignments that require you to go more depth, that are scored against rubrics that capture those 5 different elements that I talked about. So there's ways that you can do this. We've got to be thinking more creatively. I hope that that's what you'll be doing today, is starting down that road, thinking about how we're going to get all students to aspire to higher levels, to achieve at higher levels, and to build those achievement compacts that enable them to do that. EPIC has models that are designed to help do that. If you're interested, please talk to the EPIC folks at any time throughout the day. If you'd like more information about what we do, please do visit us on our website. Thank you so much for your attention today. It's a fantastic meeting. I'm really looking forward to the rest of the day. Thank you.